All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. My name is Matt Barton, and I'm the Urban Conservation Specialist with St. Louis Audubon Society. And tonight we're going to go over the BirdSafe St. Louis program. We'll go over a few different topics over the hour tonight, including things like risk factors facing migratory birds, information about the BirdSafe St. Louis project and some of our past findings, our survey protocols and logging observations in our iNaturalist projects, and then we'll talk about some of the next steps as we approach the beginning of monitoring season. So let's go ahead and jump right in. And I like to start a lot of my presentations with this picture of City Garden in downtown St. Louis. For those of you who aren't familiar with this space, this is right downtown on Market Street, just to the west of Keener Plaza, right, smack dab in the middle of everything. And when you look at this space, you can probably see why it might be an attractive place for a migratory bird. There's good habitat over there, so, there's some shelter. There's also good food resources, and there's also water features at the park. So, everything a bird might need to be happy. But when you start to look at the picture a little more closely, you might start to see some kind of anomalies, like some of these little orbs in the sky. And the reason is that this isn't a picture of City Garden. It's a picture of a reflection of City Garden in one of the surrounding buildings. And I think that this picture does a really good job of demonstrating, what birds are facing as they're trying to navigate our urban environments. A bird might birds aren't living their lives thinking, am I going to run into glass? Is there something there I might collide with? Because, birds don't know what glass is. Um, and our bird populations, unfortunately, aren't doing so well. In the United States and Canada, we've lost 30% of our bird population since 1970, which you can see represented here in this chart on the left. Uh, so most of these broad classes of birds are in decline, as you can see. And there's a lot of different reasons for these population declines. Some of the risk factors include things like habitat loss. So, grasslands being converted into subdivisions or, forests being cut for, timber or for development. Those contribute to population loss. There's also things like changing climate conditions. So things like sea level rise can, for example, affect where birds are able to survive, and that can also then further exacerbate habitat loss. There's also cat predation, which isn't just feral cats, but it's also domestic cats that are allowed to wander freely. So here's my little plug for be sure to keep your cats indoors, or if they're outside, keep them confined. And then a huge issue is collisions, which we'll talk about later in depth this evening. So first, let's talk a little bit about bird migration. So migration is a part of birds' biology that can naturally put them in some dangerous situations. Every year, 3 to 5 billion birds migrate through the United States and Canada during spring and fall migration. And that is affecting, a majority of our birds. 70% of our North American bird species are migratory, and of those migratory birds, 80% of them migrate at night. And you might think to yourself, why would a bird want to migrate at night? And there's actually a few different reasons. At night, there's cooler temperatures. So for some of these birds that are going on, really long distance migrations, that's, just less stress on them when it's a bit cooler. There's also fewer predators, so those diurnal predators that we might think of like hawks, so it's a little, less dangerous. And importantly, birds have also been shown to use celestial cues like the stars to assist them in navigation along their migratory route. Here's a little video that was put together by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it's representing spring migration. And this is using data, from radar and also things like eBird, like reporting, to represent migration. And as you can see here, these different colored dots are representing different species of birds. And migration is a little bit different every year. Things like resource availability, weather patterns, and more can contribute to, when birds are migrating through particular areas. So it's a variable each year. You can see, not all of the birds are traveling at one time. So it's really quite an amazing phenomenon. Here in the United States, we have four major migratory pathways, which you can see here, the Pacific, the Central, the Mississippi, and the Atlantic. Here in St. Louis, we're right in the middle of the Mississippi Flyway. It's denoted by the red star just south of the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. And the Mississippi Flyway is a particularly important migratory route, which is used by 60% of North American songbird species, 40% of North American waterfowl species, representing more than 325 different species of birds. And this area is, important because of the river systems that can assist the birds in navigation. And the river systems also provide a lot of valuable resources like food and shelter for birds as they're on their migratory journey. Here in St. Louis, spring migration is generally peaking in the first couple weeks of May, and birds are generally moving from the south in their wintering grounds up north to their breeding grounds. With peak migration generally being in the first couple weeks of May, that is why we observe our lights out period through lights out Heartland in May in St. Louis. In the fall, it's pretty much flipped around. Birds are traveling from their breeding grounds back south towards their wintering grounds. Fall migration is a bit more drawn out, whereas spring's a little more condensed. Some birds are already, on the move is in late July, and some are still in the move into fall. So, with that, we kind of split the difference here in St. Louis, and we have our Lights Out campaign in September. Sadly, St. Louis has been found to be a pretty dangerous place for migratory birds. In 2019, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology did a study where they looked at a few different factors, including light pollution levels, natural geography, and then radar data. And you can see that represented here in the maps on the right. So those areas with the brighter tones are showing areas with higher levels of migratory activity, and the circles are indicating the radar stations where they were getting data from. And when they reviewed and analyzed all that data, they determined that St. Louis is the fifth most dangerous city for migratory birds in the spring and the sixth most dangerous in the fall. When it comes to human-linked causes of bird mortality, bird collisions are a really huge issue, unfortunately. It's estimated that up to 1 billion birds are killed annually by building collisions in the United States. And you can see a breakdown of that, where those collisions are occurring below. It's important to note that, a majority of these collisions are happening at, residences and low-rise buildings. So, it's not just an issue that affects our high-rise buildings in our downtown spaces, although those buildings do have the mortality rate, birds per building is the highest at those. Uh, when it comes to these collisions, there's two primary risk factors that drive them, which are light and glass. So, like we talked about a little earlier, many birds are migrating at nighttime and they're using the stars and other celestial cues to assist them as they navigate. Um, And when birds are passing through our urban areas with a lot of light pollution, they can become disoriented and confused by that sky glow. And that sky glow can also then draw birds into our urban and suburban areas where there's a higher likelihood that they'll interact with some of our infrastructure. The issue with the light pollution can be especially dangerous when there's a low cloud ceiling and bad weather, because those clouds are reflecting the light as well, and the birds tend to try to move a little lower in the sky bank if there's, severe weather higher up in higher altitudes. An example of this is the September 11th tribute in Lights Memorial, which some of you might be familiar with. So each year on September 11th, two beacons of light are shined into the sky from dusk to dawn in commemoration of the attacks. And as September 11th happens to fall on the calendar, it's right in the midst of fall migration when a lot of birds are, naturally passing through New York City and along the eastern seaboard. And in this picture here, you can see the two columns of light, and it looks like, almost like insects, kind of how we might see insects drawn to, beacons of light. But those are actually birds that are trapped in the columns there. And so whenever it was realized that this was occurring at the memorial, uh, people realized that, something needed to be done. So now each year when they do the Tribute in Lights Memorial, volunteers with the New York City Bird Alliance go out and they monitor for birds to get trapped in the columns of light. And whenever it's observed that 1,000 birds have been counted in the columns, or a bird is observed to fall to the ground out of exhaustion, the lights are turned off for 20 minutes, which gives the birds a chance to vacate the area and continue on their migratory journey. That other issue with that drives collisions is glass. And so, birds see the world in a pretty literal way, and they don't know what glass is. So glass can have a couple of big risk factors. One is reflectivity, like you can see in this top image on the left, where the photographer is taking a picture of these really reflective windows and it's reflecting all of the foliage behind and to the right of the photographer. So a bird might see those reflections and think, hey, that's a tree where I can go perch or maybe find some food. So they might try to fly over there, in the process have a collision and either be injured or killed. There's also the issue of transparent glass, where a bird simply doesn't realize that there is anything there at all. And in those situations, again, the bird tries to fly through that area, has a collision, and is injured. In our urban spaces, we also have what we like to call glass canyons, like you can see here in the picture on the bottom. And those are, nice pieces of infrastructure for people so, that we don't have to go outside when it's maybe, raining or cold. But it's just another obstacle that birds have to try to figure out and navigate as they're going through our urban spaces. Here's a couple of pictures I took in downtown Clayton around some of the buildings that we monitor, and they demonstrate, that really hyper reflective glass. So, the buildings are reflecting the sky around them, they're reflecting each other, and it's a mess. And then we also have, to boot, we also have the glass canyon here. So with all of those risks and threats that face birds, that's what saw the impetus for the creation of the BirdSafe St. Louis program, with the goal being to establish long-term community relationships that support bird safe practices and reduce bird fatalities in the St. Louis region. And what we're trying to do is collect data on the where, when, and who is colliding with windows so we can approach property managers with targeted actions to prevent bird mortality and provide solutions. So what can be done with the data that we collect? Luckily, the data we collect is put to many different uses. One is the Global Bird Collision Mapper, which is an online aggregator of collision monitoring work like we do in St. Louis, but from programs all around the world. So this is a place that can serve as a repository of all that data, and it's also then available to different researchers and practitioners that might have use for the data. Um, it's our data from St. Louis specifically has also been used in some larger national studies, including a study between National Audubon Society and the analytics firm KPMG, where they analyzed our data and data from Philadelphia to get a better idea of collisions with infrastructure during spring and fall migration at different sites. Our data is also available in our iNaturalist projects for people who use that um, program. That data is also then available to researchers and practitioners. And then importantly, we're also using it to start conversations with local property managers and different stakeholders. Over the past year, I've done a lot more outreach with the Board of Sustainability in Clayton and in downtown St. Louis. And I'm also starting to interact more with our Board of Aldermen here in St. Louis City to start trying to get more buildings, including municipal and city buildings, involved with lights out campaigns, and then also treating issues as far as glass where we're documenting it. So it's an idea of what we've seen in the past um, in downtown St. Louis from the fall of 2020 to the fall of 2025, noting that we did not have collision monitoring in the fall of 2022. We've recorded 1,761 observations, accounting for 97 species of bird. And you can see the species that we've encountered most frequently here below. In downtown Clayton, we started monitoring in spring of 2024, and from spring of 24 to fall of 25, we've recorded 233 observations, accounting for 44 species of birds. Some overall information from our efforts last year. Between the two sites, we conducted 130 surveys and documented 547 collisions, which you can see broken down in the table on the right. And at each site, we're beginning to see that, our most problematic buildings are located near green spaces. Last year in Clayton, the building that we recorded the most observations around is 1 North Brentwood, which is just to the north of Shaw Park. In downtown St. Louis, we've recorded the most observations at last year and historically at Bank of America Plaza. That was that building in the very first slide with the very, very reflective windows. And that building is just to the south of City Garden. There's a lot more in-depth information about what we've encountered. I have prepared our 2025 report, which you can find on our website or by following the QR code below. That goes into a lot more depth about, where we located collisions, what species we encountered, and more. So now let's go ahead and talk about what this spring will look like. So once again, we are planning to have surveys in downtown St. Louis and in downtown Clayton. Um, in downtown Clayton, the reason that we originally started there was we were noticing, an increasing number of buildings being built or redeveloped. Um, so there was, some concern there. And also we wanted to work with Clayton because we thought that they would be, be receptive to our recommendations, and it might be a little easier to get some things done there versus in St. Louis City. It in downtown St. Louis, we're continuing our monitoring work there because it is a site that we have a well-documented history of, a lot of collisions. So we want to continue our work there and really advocate where we're seeing that high mortality. When we're monitoring at two different sites as well, that gives us another data set that we can use for analysis and try to, get some do some research and see, what exactly is happening. So, for example, if we found that there was a really high number of collisions in downtown St. Louis on a particular date, it might be interesting to look at Clayton and see, was there a corresponding, bump up in collisions on that day in Clayton as well? If not, why? So it gives us the ability to ask some interesting questions. And this map that you see on the screen now, this is our monitoring map in downtown Clayton, where the blue buildings are indicating the buildings that we want to survey around, and the dark blue borders around those blue buildings are generally indicating where the building is accessible. So here's a little bit of a zoomed in version showing those kind of dark blue borders showing where you're generally able to walk around those buildings. And so the general protocol is that we want to walk around each of those buildings that we're monitoring, and we're looking for dead or stunned birds. When we encounter a bird, we want to do a few things. First is we want to take some photos, and we take photos from multiple angles, including a top-down view or dorsal view, a bottom view or ventral, a side view, a clear shot of the head, and then also a context shot, which we'll get into on the next slide. And the reason that we want to take photos from multiple angles is to help with identification. Sometimes, depending on the species of birds, there might just be very small differences between different species. So we want to make sure that we're getting as much documentation as we can while we're still with the bird. That way, if we need to look back on those photos to see about identification, we have as much data as possible. And then once we have the photos, we'll start submitting that data into our iNaturalist projects. So the context shot is a picture that is showing where the bird is generally located along the building, like you can see here in the images below. And when we take context shots, we place a small cone near the bird. And the program does provide those cones to our volunteers. And the reason that we use those is so that the bird's location can quickly be seen within the shot. Some species that we encounter, like warblers, are really small, so that cone helps them to stand out in that shot so that anyone that's looking at those later on can really quickly see, this is around where the bird was located. So here's an example of just showing those different shots that we want to document. So from left to right, we have that dorsal or the top shot, the side or lateral view, a view that's a little more zoomed in of the head, the ventral or bottom shot, and then also the context photo.
Matt, can I ask you a question on that?
Sure.
For the context, how much of the building are you looking to see?
Yeah, so you're wanting to mainly see, I would usually what I'm doing is there's not really a true science to it. I typically am trying to like back out enough that I'm able to see a wide or like, spread of the building and its facade, but I also want to make sure that that cone is in there as well. So you're trying to, I would say, get a wide view so that you can easily, you can see like not just a really small section of the building, but you also don't want to be so far out that you're losing sight of like your cone.
Thank you. Makes sense.
Yep. And then so when we have all those shots, we submit those into iNaturalist projects for our respective sites. For those of you who haven't used iNaturalist before, it is a crowdsourced species identification system and an organism occurrence recording tool. And so it's really useful for recording observations, getting help with different identifications, and then collaborating with others to collect information for a common purpose, like our monitoring projects. And it's really useful because it is accessible. Anybody is able to get into iNaturalist and see what we see. The data can then also be exported from iNaturalist for further analysis, and it also helps us use less supplies. In the past, we actually used to write out a physical paper ticket for each collision we found, but that is all a thing of the past because we log everything digitally now in iNaturalist. So in order to log in iNaturalist, you'll need to download that app on your phone. Um, so if you don't have a smartphone, that's not a problem. The key will be that we just need to make sure that you're out there with someone who does have iNaturalist and a smartphone. That way they're able to log the collisions while you're both out there. If you're getting the app on iOS, you'll want to select iNaturalist Classic from the App Store. Uh, iNaturalist is working on a revised, updated version of the app, but it currently doesn't support adding observations to projects like ours. So you'll want to make sure to get iNaturalist Classic. Um, then what you'll do is you'll create an account if you don't have one already, and we'll collect your iNaturalist username. That way we can get you added to our projects and you'll be able to make submissions. So let's go over just an example of logging an observation in the iNaturalist project. These screenshots are from my phone, so they're from an Android, but the view is very similar in iOS as well, so the screenshot should be pretty applicable either way. And the downtown St. Louis and Clayton protocols are nearly identical, so the first steps of these processes are going to be the same regardless of which site you're at. And so the first thing you'll want to do is take the photos. So like we were talking about earlier, you want to make sure that you've got all the different shots. And once you have your photos, you'll click the Add Observation button. On Android, that's a green circle with a little plus symbol. And once you do that, it'll take you to the next screen where it will begin the observation. So the first thing you'll do is you'll add your photographs where you'll click this button here with the little photo. And this will pull up a, your gallery of all the different photos on your phone. And you select the photos that you want to add to the observation. Once you click them, it'll light up with a little blue check mark to indicate that's what you've selected. Uh, and then once you've chose all of your images, you'll click the Add button, and that'll take you back to the primary observation screen where you can see all of those photos we selected. The next field down is what did you see? And that's where we'll put in the species or family of birds if you know it. If you're ever in doubt and you're not exactly sure what you're seeing, you can always just type in birds, and that will then, cue other people in the project or iNaturalist to come in and see, can we identify this further down to the species level. The next field down is notes. And that's a good field to note to use in case there's anything you want to tell me or the project coordinators. It's also a good place to mark down if you have an incidental find, which we'll talk about on the next couple slides here. The next field down is the date and time. That should automatically default for you, so just make sure that that's accurate. The next field down is the GPS. So each of our observations has a GPS stamp so that we can plot that information in iNaturalist. And that also should use the location services on your phone if you've enabled that. But if you don't have that enabled or you just want to take a look, you can click that field and it'll show you a like Google map where you can zoom in and adjust as needed. Location visibility that we want to have as open. That way, other people in the iNaturalist community are able to see, what we're doing, and what we've logged. And like for example, global bird collision mapper. So once you've gone through all of those fields, we will get down to the Add to Projects field. And when you click that, it will bring you to a screen that looks like the screen on the left. And from there, what you want to do is select the project that you're logging the observation in. So for Clayton, you can see is the downtown Clayton site. And then for downtown St. Louis, it's BirdSafeSTL. And so in this example, we'll go through a observation in Clayton, and the first field that you'll see here is building name in downtown Clayton. And the buildings there are listed generally from east to west, but what you'll do is you'll use those site maps to help identify the building that you're at, and that's how you'll enter in, select which building you're at. This is an important step because if you are at, for example, downtown Clayton and you know the building you're at should be listed because it's one of our target buildings. If you don't see it listed, there's a chance that you might have accidentally clicked the wrong project. So that's kind of a good way to fail safe and say, oh, am I at the right site? Um, each of the fields also, just as a note, it has a description underneath it. So that way, if you're out and you're not exactly sure what is being asked by the header, that little description can also help you to determine, what's being asked. And you'll also be working with a partner who can help if there's any, questions. So the next field down is selecting the side of the building, which is pretty straightforward. You'll just select which side of the building you're on. Then there is the next field, which is incidental find. That is going to be a yes or no question, and you'll choose yes if if you located the bird around a building that was not, specifically designated in our survey, or if it's between buildings. So if you're going from Centene A to Centene B and you find a bird between them, you can log that as incidental. In the event that you're logging an incidental find, it always helps to put information in that notes section to say, the address or around where you located the bird. The next field down is the distance from strike point. We don't, we typically just walk that off. We don't require you to take out a tape measure or anything like that. And then you'll just record that distance in feet and inches, roughly. Uh, when you're recording the feet and inches, it's best to use abbreviations like FT and IN instead of a apostrophe or quotation mark. It doesn't export quite as neatly when we're pulling that out of iNaturalist, but in the event that you do, it's not the end of the world and we can adjust that pretty easily. And when you're looking for the strike point, you want to assess where the collision occurred. So you want to look, at the building, obviously, that you're looking at, but you also want to take a look up to make sure that maybe the bird didn't collide with an overhang on the building. Because, there might be an instance where a bird hits a part of the building that's an overhang versus the actual building. So then you would want to take your distance measurement from that overhang versus from the actual side of the building. And then there's also the final field here, which is possible predation. That's also a yes or no question. And in instances where we find a bird where there's obvious predation, we don't need to log that bird in the project. Some signs of, pretty clear predation would be things like you locate a bird that's missing its head, or it's been partially consumed, or maybe you just find like a wing or something like that. In those instances, when we know pretty clearly that it's a predatory event, we don't need to log that. In the event that you're not sure or you're kind of on the edge of, this could be predation or maybe it's not, you go ahead and log those collisions and then just mark that possible predation field as yes. and that'll cue myself and the other project coordinators to review the images on that and to make a determination on whether or not that's, predation or it's a collision. So after you're done with that, you can see here on this image on the left, we've got all of the different fields here filled in. And if you've forgotten any different fields, um, when you try to go back to the original screen, it will stop you from going there. So when you have everything filled out, you would click this little check mark. And if you don't have everything filled out, it'll prevent you from going on. So that's a nice way to kind of prove to make sure, you filled out everything that you need to. But once you click the check mark, it'll take you back to that original screen where we can see all of the photos we added, all of the different details. And now you'll see that there's a 1 under the projects field, which is denoting that we've logged this information into one of our projects as well. And so once you're finished with all of that and you've got everything that you need, you just would click the little green circle with the check mark, and that would complete the observation in the project. In da in downtown St. Louis, like I mentioned, the protocols are really similar to downtown Clayton. Here's a map showing the buildings that we're primarily surveying around in downtown St. Louis. Each season, we're roughly surveying around 13 buildings in downtown St. Louis and around 15 in downtown Clayton, depending on things like construction and different renovations. So some seasons a building might, be added or fall off depending on conditions at that site. In the downtown St. Louis project, uh, there's all those same fields that we log in downtown Clayton, but there's also two small additional fields. One is carcass information, which you can see here. That is always going to be no. In the past, we had collected some of the birds that we found for educational purposes in taxidermy, but we're not doing that at this time. So the answer to that field will always be no. And then in downtown St. Louis, we also have the section of building field. And on some of our larger buildings that receive a fair number of collisions, we have what we call these section maps, with the idea being that we can then, on these large sites, really hone in on where the collisions are occurring. And then in a situation where we're working with a property manager to maybe make some improvements, and there's limited resources, we can help to direct treatments to be concentrated at the areas that were most problematic. Here is an example of a section map here in downtown St. Louis. So this is for the Spire building. So say for example that we found a bird where the highlight is here. In that section field of the observation, we would just write Spire-UW-2 in that field, and that's all you need to do there. Aside from that, it's all the same. So just really quickly, some frequently asked questions that usually come up. One is, how long does a survey take? And the answer is that it varies. The average time is probably around an hour and a half, but it is a little bit variable depending on things like how fast you walk, how many collisions you're encountering. So, on days when you're finding more collisions, it takes generally a little bit longer since you have more to log into the projects. So what do we do when we encounter a dead bird? Whenever we locate a dead bird, after we've logged all of the data that we need, we find a trash can and we dispose of the carcasses. And we do that for multiple reasons. One is that it prevents the birds from being counted again by subsequent surveys. We don't want to, double count birds. We want our data to be as accurate as possible. So that helps to prevent double counting. And then it's also just generally more sanitary so that, we're helping to keep our urban spaces clean, and it helps to, keep different scavengers and pests such as rats, from the spaces. A question is, do you wear gloves? That is your choice. We do provide disposable gloves that you can request through our survey, which I'll get to that towards the end of the presentation. I would say, if you're not wearing gloves, we'd recommend using hand sanitizer after handling birds and just following, good sanitary principles when handling wildlife. Not, making sure that you're disinfecting properly, not touching your face and your eyes, things like that. Just, good hygiene. Uh, so paper forms, like I mentioned earlier, that's something we used to do in the past, but iNaturalist has eliminated the need for those, so you won't need to do any sort of paper logs. And then for the maps for each site, we will provide digital files of those for everybody so that those are available and you can download those to your device so you can pull those up quickly. Um, I always try to bring a print copy with me just in case there's any issues with, cell phone reception downtown. That way you've got a good map on hand, or, you can also like download it to your device, which would help to eliminate the issues as far as, internet connectivity. When we encounter injured or stunned birds, there's as we're doing our work, there's a chance that that's something that might happen. If you find a bird that's stunned and they're exposed in an immediate danger, it's always good to try to help relocate them to somewhere that's a little safer if you can, like maybe some nearby shrubs or just somewhere that there's a little bit more cover. I generally go back after surveys, and if I, relocate a bird just to see how they're doing and possibly take them to rehab. If you find a bird that, is really visibly injured and you think it needs help, you can, there's luckily a lot of great rehab resources here in the St. Louis area. So for injured songbirds, you would want to, which is the majority of the birds that we would encounter, you would want to contact wild bird rehabilitation. If you happen to find an injured raptor, those would go to World Bird Sanctuary. Injured waterfowl would go to Wildlife Rescue Center. But in any of those instances, if you find an injured bird, you would want to reach out to those rehab centers before taking the bird out to get some guidance from them and explain, what's happening. They might also have you text them a picture, and then they'll provide you with guidance on what to do from there. In the event that you do take an injured bird into a rehab facility, just please send me a quick email or let me know some way. I like to log that information in our logbook for the season, and then I also like to try to follow up and see, what was the outcome there. So, just how do the surveys work? Uh, we put out a survey calendar, which you'll get access to, and that'll have the calendar for each day of the season. And what you do is you just fill in your name on the day that you'd like to survey. You are allowed to sign up for multiple surveys, so if you want to sign up for multiple days, feel free. All surveys will have at least two people on them. We have people work in pairs just for things like general safety. We've never had any issues in the past, but it's always good to work with a partner. And then it's also just good to have two sets of eyes out and looking. Um, we ideally we'll have everybody's first survey with someone who's done the protocol, just like we were talking about that way in case there's any questions with the app or you're, not clear on a particular field, someone's there to help you. And once you and a partner are, signed up for a particular date, as it approaches, you will coordinate with your partner on when and where you'd like to meet. Uh, Typically, we're starting around sunrise, so in spring we're looking at around 6 to 6:30 as a recommended start time. And we start early for a few reasons. One is that we want to survey before building maintenance crews have started cleaning up around buildings. because that does happen sometimes where some buildings will have their custodial staff go out and clean up the birds. So we want to be out there and logging accurate information. There's also less of a chance of scavengers interfering if we're out there earlier as well, so that we can get to the bird before any scavengers. And um, something to note is that, as we get further into monitoring this spring, sunrise is going to be getting a bit earlier. So, uh, for reference, uh, in mid-April, sunrise is around 6:24 a.m., but by the end of April, sunrise is moving back to around 5:38. As far as parking, both locations have metered parking, which is free before 8 o'clock. So we really don't have to worry about that, which is nice. Um, in Clayton, there's also free parking on North Central near the library. Downtown, it's mostly going to be metered parking. When you're out working with your partners and logging observations in iNaturalist, we want to make sure that we're only logging one entry per bird. So you can coordinate, amongst your partner, however you'd like to do it. So if one person wants to be doing all of the posts, or if you want to, alternate between, birds, that's totally fine. We just want to make sure one entry per bird. Um, if you encounter a stunned bird, we do want to log them as well. Um, Obviously, we don't want to stress the birds out and go and handle them or to get all like the different photos that we would with a deceased bird. So if you want to just take kind of a photo from a distance, just log in the notes that, the bird was stunned. Occasionally, while you're out doing the work, people will come up and, on their way to work, or, maybe someone that works at a building will come out and ask, hey, what are you doing? And it's always a good way to, start up conversations and explain, what we're doing. We'll have name tags available upon request so that you have something that looks a little more official. If you have another like name tag from Missouri Master Naturalist or something like that that you would prefer to use, that's fine with me as well. But generally, if someone asks me what I'm doing, I'll say, my name's Matt. I'm a volunteer with BirdSafe St. Louis, and we're documenting bird collisions in downtown St. Louis. Usually, that people are really, when you tell them something like that, people usually have that you'll get their story about, a bird collision they've encountered, or, birds that they've noticed outside of the building as well on their way to work. People are usually pretty receptive to what we're doing. In the event that, you're ever uncomfortable or someone asks you to leave the property, like, a security guard or something, when in doubt, just go ahead and leave. We really don't have many issues. Most of the buildings know that, we're down there monitoring. But in the event that, you ever have any issues, just let me know, and that way I can kind of keep tabs on that as well. But by and large, you won't have any issues at all. We do want to make sure that we're surveying all buildings on the route. So some days you'll only find a few birds, and other days, you'll find more. So time can be variable, like we mentioned earlier. If you find no collisions, that is still data. Absence of collisions is still a data point. So there's not a good way to log that in iNaturalist. So in the event that you do an entire survey and there's no collisions found, just send me a quick email. That way I can put that in our logbook for the season. And MDC is also doing a Bats of Missouri project in iNaturalist, and the goal of that is to document species and their distribution throughout the state. And this is a completely optional thing. You don't have to do any observations with bats, but it does help our friends at the Department of Conservation, since we're already out there, doing work. If we find anything, it's very helpful for them as well. If you'd like to help log bats, you would basically just take a couple of pictures of the bat and submit that as a general iNaturalist observation. So you won't have all of those additional like project questions like we have for when we're documenting birds. The MDC team then is able to see, a bat has been logged in Missouri, and they can review that and add it to their projects. In my personal experience, we tend to see more bats in the fall when we're having those kind of big temperature swings from day to night. But there is a chance you'll see them during the spring. One big thing is do not handle bats. Bats can carry rabies and be vectors for other illnesses. So unless you have experience working with bats and you're vaccinated against rabies, please don't handle the bats. If you're really concerned and think that a bat might need some help, please, contact a rehabber and someone who's equipped to work with bats. So with that being said, what's next? So what I'll be doing in the following week here is I'll send out a Google form to collect some more information from everybody. That'll be where I collect your iNaturalist name so I can add you to the projects. I'll get information about equipment needs like name tags, the context photo safety cones, and disposable gloves. And then I'll also be mailing or emailing out those maps and a copy of our slides from tonight's presentation, as well as a recording in case you'd like to have a refresher before you do your first survey. I'll also be sending out our sign up calendar in the coming week so that people can start signing up for those different shifts. And I'm looking at this season to follow our historical time frame for spring collision monitoring. So we're probably going to be starting in mid-April, and we'll go around until the end of May. But with that said, I am happy to go ahead and answer any questions. If you're not comfortable asking questions on the call and would prefer to send me an email, I've got my address down there as well, and I'm happy to help however I can with any questions you might have. But with that, let me just pull up the chat here, and I will see what we've got there, and we can go over any questions. All right, so I see a question here about should we always leave the birds where they're found? So it'll depend on kind of the circumstances and then also the state of the bird. So anytime that we find a deceased bird, once we've logged all of the information for them and put them in that information into our projects, we want to take that bird and dispose of it. As far as injured birds, I typically, if they're, not in immediate danger, I'll typically let them sit and try to get their bearings a little bit. If it's a situation where, they're like right, next to a busy roadway or something like that, I might try to help move them just somewhere like into some nearby foliage. That way they're a little more sheltered and there's, less risk of something happening to them. Um, let's see. Got some more comments here. So yeah, we'll have disposable gloves available for people if you'd like those. Some people will use some reusable gloves that they're able to sanitize and then you reuse again. I realize that isn't always practical for everyone, so we do also offer those disposable gloves as an option for everyone.
Matt, I have another question for you.
Sure.
Do we need to join the two different projects on iNaturalist ahead of time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we'll do is that Google form that I send out this week will collect one of the fields of information that it will collect is your iNaturalist information, your username. What that then prompts me to do is to uh, you take that username, get into the projects, and add you. That way, you're able to log. Our projects are private for people to actually log the information, so you have to go through the protocol, like just a random person couldn't add, to our project. So that's why we have the username and we collect that information.
Got
Um,
it.
yeah, but then what I'll do is I'll add you to the project and it'll prompt you then in the app to say, oh, Matt has added you to the project. You hit accept, and then those two projects will show up when you're logging your observations.
And if there's a day where, like, let's just say, because I work in those in between those two areas, if I just went out on my own and I haven't signed up and I find a collision, should I plan on logging these things, or is it only you only want the data when it's through the sign up and through this program and the protocol?
So yeah, I mean, if you're finding a collision, you can log collisions any time that you find them, and just submit those as iNaturalist. They won't explicitly like be in our projects, but like if you found something, like say you were downtown and it was outside of our normal survey windows, like and you found a bird around one of our buildings or, just in downtown in general, you could log that in the projects. But if you say that you found like a bird out in Webster Groves, you wouldn't log that in the project itself, but you can log, birds that you're encountering out in the wild, in iNaturalist as well.
And then if I'm within the survey window time period, like the official start and end date, and I'm up early because I'm bird watching that day or something, I could go ahead and still log within the program within like if I'm downtown doing that sort of thing.
Um, you could. Typically, I would say, if you were just out there and you found something kind of randomly, sure, yeah, that's totally fine. Um, but I would say like make sure that, if you're going out surveying to sign up, just that way we know who's out there and we don't maybe have, a couple of teams accidentally kind of doing the same work, if you know what I mean.
Yep, sure. I understand. Thanks.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions for the time being?
Hey, Matt,
Yes.
I just wanted to say I carry a paper bag in case there's a bird that needs to maybe go to rehab or something.
Yeah.
And I read recently that if it's good to put like paper towel or an old rag in the bottom of the paper bag so the bird has something to hold on to. Otherwise, it slips and slides around, which is kind of stressful. So just, to have some things on hand for maybe injured birds.
Yeah, that's a good, definitely a good suggestion. I know, like personally, I typically have like in the trunk of my car for like situations with birds, I have like a little shoebox with some like just little towels in the bottom. That way, if I find a bird that I need to take to rehab, I have a good way of doing it. But yeah, something like a paper bag is, certainly a good alternative. And like you said, putting something in the bottom so that they can have a little bit of purchase there, certainly would help them as well. Okie dokie. Well, with that, we are right at around 7 o'clock here, so doing good on time. But yeah, if anybody has any sorts of questions between now and the beginning of the season, feel free to reach out anytime. And then, like I said, this coming week, I should have an email coming out with that form that'll collect information about your iNaturalist account and what equipment you might like. And then I'll also be opening up uh, the sign up calendar so that people can start to sign up for shifts and we'll get ready for the spring season.